Okay. Hi. Erev Tov, everyone. Guess we can already say Chodesh Tov as well. We know Mincha Nichnas Adar Ma'abin B'Simcha, but strictly speaking, it's not Adar yet. It's only the second day of Rosh Chodesh is Adar, but also Shana Me'uberet. So the poskim discuss when we say Mincha Nichnas Adar Ma'abin B'Simcha, is that from the first Adar or from the second Adar? Whatever it may be, B'ezrat Hashem, we should have a month with a lot of Simcha, but 4 very difficult months that have just passed, and it should only be Ma'abin, only have things to be happy about, and it should only increase in the months ahead. So we've been talking this week about meat and milk. We'll finish it up. But last night I started talking about the sous-vide machine. There was a lot of interest. I didn't realize how many people out there are about to go and buy one of these machines and want to know if you can use it for meat and milk again. So again, just for those who weren't here last night, very quickly, you have this, the way this machine works, you have this basin, this container with water inside. There's a heating element which magically heats all the water to a uniform temperature. And the advantage is the food inside is cooked. It's the same degree of heat, and it cooks much more uniformly, and it cooks much better, and it doesn't burn, and it conserves heat, and all these wonderful things. So the food is placed inside these bags, which are vacuum sealed, and that goes inside the water. So after I spoke about it last night, somebody approached me and said, "What about the fact that you have your food in a plastic bag? Surely that's a problem in terms of health, etc." So I don't know. I don't know the specifics, and I don't know how it works or what the rationale is, the health rationale, the health excuse to use it. But in any event, that would that's another consideration. But we said, so all the poskim say that to use this machine, to use meat and milk at the same time would be problematic. Either because there is a transfer of taste. Again, we have liquid here, we have heat. We would assume that there's a transfer of taste from between the bags. In the same way that if you have a pot which has moisture on it, and there's meat on one side and milk on the other, we assume there's a transfer of taste. Even if you say that because it's vacuum sealed, there is no transfer of taste, nonetheless, at the same time, maybe you didn't seal the bag properly, maybe you'll get confused, maybe there'll be a tear, something will happen. Or the poskim say, don't use it at the same time for meat and milk. The more interesting question is, using the same machine, first for meat and then for milk, or vice versa. And I briefly mentioned to you last night, the two sides of this. We might say that this is a classic case of nat bar nat, right? Nat bar nat, meaning when there's a transfer of taste, first from the food, then to the pot, and then from the pot back into the next food. That's why we say, if I was to cook Maariv food in a meaty pot, that's the classic case of nat bar nat. The first time I cooked meat in the pot, the notain time, the taste went from the meat into the pot. That's one transfer. The second time I cooked the food, I'm now cooking Maariv food, the taste from the meat, from the walls, is going back into the food. That is nat bar nat, and we assume that is a weaker taste, so the food would not actually be meaty. Certainly, b'diavad, after the fact, that Maariv food, if it was eaten with milk, that would be okay. It could be eaten on milky utensils, etc. So here, we might say that there are many different transfers of taste. That's one way of looking at it. From the meat into the bag, into the water, into the machine, back into the water, back into the bag the next time I cook. And if that's correct, then it would be permitted to use it, meat and milk consecutively. Or they say, no, it's all happening at the same time. The truth is, we have a precedent for this. Very interesting precedent of Tzvi Pesach Frank in Shut Har Tzvi. So he has a tshuva where he was asked by a certain yeshiva, and the way that they would heat up the food, again, I don't know exactly how this, what it looked like, but they had, it was not a sous-vide machine, but what they had was a big container where with water inside, and there were pipes coming in, there was a heating element, and that the water, they would place the pots inside this container in the water, and that's how it would heat up. So they asked the question, could they put in the water the pot of meat and the pot of milk next to each other to heat up the food? And answers the Har Tzvi, not only can you not heat up the meat and the milk together at the same time, he says you can't use the same, it calls it an ambati, I think, but this container with the water for meat and milk consecutively, one after the other, because we assume that it accepts the taste, it accepts the flavor from whatever pot was used to cook it. So if it was used for meat, it should be used for meat, used for milk was used for milk. What about, so you say, what about nat bar nat? Again, the taste is going from the food into the pot, into the water, into the container. So it says the Tzvi Pesach Frank, he says, yeah, we have a chavatat, one of the commentaries on Yoreh, who tells us that, again, nat bar nat, what we mentioned before, the classic case is where the transfer of taste happens afterwards. At one stage you cooked into the pot, that was the first transfer. The second time you cooked was another one. But everything that's taking place now, while it's on the fire, all the cooking that is taking place, that is one transfer of taste. So if we accept that, it would be the same thing with our machine, that it's not correct to say that it's going from the meat to the bag to the water to the. It's all one transfer of taste. It's as if we think of the outer container as one large pot. And in the same way that it's now a meaty pot, so then I can only cook meat in it. So that is one way, and that is how there are many poskim who would be stringent on this matter and say, therefore, you would have to assume that it's meaty or it's milky, use it for one of those things. If afterwards you use a bag which has got parov food inside and you cook that, so that is the classic case of nat bar nat. So even if I've used the machine for meat, and later on I have this parov food in a bag, then that food would still remain parov, and I could still, certainly after the fact, it was mixed in with, if I eat it, I don't have to wait before eating milk, etc. So that is one view. That is one machloket about this. Generally speaking, the Ashkenazim follow the more stringent view on this in terms of nat bar nat. The Sfardim follow the more lenient view. All of this, again, is if we say, which most poskim assume, that even though there's a vacuum seal, that there's still going to be a transfer of taste. There is a minority opinion out there that says, because of the vacuum seal, there's no transfer, and you could use it, meat after milk, even, I saw one place where it said even kosher after non-kosher. But again, I think that is it's probably a more minority opinion. And then, what comes up, the other interesting question I saw, which is let's say somebody is a Sephardi, so they follow the lenient view, or somebody who follows the lenient view and uses their sous-vide machine for meaty and milky, one after the other. And now I am an Ashkenazi, or I'm following the more stringent view, and I'm a guest in that person's house. Can I eat there? So I saw somebody wanted to say that yes, you could, even though you yourself personally would follow the stringent view. We actually have a sfeik sfeika here. We have a double safek. One safek is maybe this is the case of nat bar nat, that we don't accept that opinion and therefore wouldn't be allowed. The other safek is maybe the fact that it's vacuum sealed means there's no transfer of taste, but would be permitted. So even though you may not want to rely on that lekatchila, but he said that was okay to rely on if I'm a guest in somebody's house. There is a third svara, which I saw mentioned as well, which the poskim say that maybe the machine would cut, if it's hot enough that it was essentially performing hagala every time that you turn it on. Now you can control the temperature and can be very, very specific. So it may not be hot enough, or may yes be, but that is another factor which is added into the mix. And maybe again, if we view the machine as one large pot, essentially, so we don't say that when I have a pot, I have a meaty pot, that every time I cook it, I'm doing hagala again. So that may be a reason to be more stringent. But those are some of the views on that matter in terms of this machine, and I'm sure there will be more to come and more said about it. But that's kind of where those are the two main views where the poskim are holding right now. Another interesting question I saw comes up with meat and milk, which this was asked a number of years ago. This was in Eretz Chemdas, Ask the Rabbi project. So one of the questions was somebody who is taking lessons at a culinary school, at a non-kosher, let's say, culinary school, and they wanted to know, is that permitted? They're going to be dealing with non-kosher foods in terms of cook. Obviously, you can't eat them, but could they, in terms of learning, in terms of preparing, could they cook the foods? Was there a concern? What if there's meat and milk that's being prepared in these lessons together? Is it called that someone's doing it in order to learn, in order to improve their skills, right, in order to get the certificate? Is that called benefiting from meat and milk together? That's how the question was posed. Oftentimes, you get a question, one question is asked, but you have to tell the questioner, actually, there's a different question you should be asking as well. In this case, they asked the question about deriving benefit, but there's a much more primary concern. Before we get to benefit, is cooking, as we mentioned, cooking meat and milk in and of itself. That is a prohibition. So would it be permitted for somebody to take part in this culinary school? So there are a number of different issues which are mentioned here. The first one, obviously, as I said, it's not taking these lessons is not going to permit one to eat non-kosher food. There is a difference in halacha sometimes, in certain cases, between eating something, swallowing something, and tasting something. But nonetheless, still to taste the non-kosher food, that would be prohibited. Would we have to say that a person is not allowed to participate at all because of a concern that they might inadvertently come to taste the food? So that probably would not be required. That we could get around. But again, the major problem over here would be in terms of cooking meat and milk, even if you're not going to eat it, not planning on eating it. It is a complete prohibition. That is a Torah prohibition. Lot vashel gdi b'chalev imo. You cannot cook meat and milk together. So is there any leniency? Could there possibly be any way around this? So there are two leniencies, ironically, which are mentioned over here. Number one is that meat and milk, in a biblical level, the right says we talk about meat, we're talking about beef. We're not talking about fowl. Now, midrabanan, chicken and poultry is going to be considered. It's going to be considered basar midrabanan, and therefore we can't have chicken and milk together. But that would apply to eating. That wouldn't necessarily apply to cooking. So therefore, if in the cooking school it was chicken or whatever, then that may be one leniency. A second one, again ironic, is if they are cooking meat from a non-kosher animal. So there is not the prohibition, again, still prohibited to eat, but the prohibition of meat and milk applies from a kosher species, not from a non-kosher species. Now, again, to be careful here, I don't mean, from a cow, which was not shechted, which was not kosher. There it's far more complicated. And then there are discussions with a nevela and a treifa, if that's still going to be meat and milk. But if it's a non-kosher species, so then that would not be a prohibition of cooking meat and milk together. And so in the Shuvah, it suggested that this would be permitted. There may be issues of marit ayin, but if it's done in a way and it's part of the class and it's obvious to everybody they're not going to eat it, so you might get around that. But there's another problem, which is a bigger issue over here, which is, what about the pots? Because if you have, according to most poskim, if I have a pot which was used for meat, and now it's within 24 hours, and I use it for milk, or vice versa, that is probably transgressing the Isur Doraita of cooking meat and milk, because you have the meat or the milk flavor that's in the walls of the pot, again, within 24 hours. So we still consider it's not yet a blemished state. That is cooking. That is going to be prohibited. So it's quite amusing. In the Tshuva, they write, they say, if it's possible, if the person wants to go, and they end off saying that at the end of the day, the person has to know, this is not a simple situation. It's obviously very complex. If it's a case of shatat chak and parnasah, and it's required, and a person's able to implement all the safeguards, so they have to know by themselves whether they can do it or not, whether they'll be able to live up to these standards. But there's an issue here with the pots. So they say, if you are going to do it, and you're going to be cooking in this way, so you need to have separate pots. You need to have pots for meat, pots for milk, pots for kosher, pots for non-kosher. It's like the old joke where we have all the different sets of utensils in the kitchen, all the different sets of pots. Why so many? We have one for meat, and you have one for milk, and then you have one for non-kosher. Okay, that's a joke, but it's in this case that would actually be required in order not to be able to transgress the prohibition of cooking meat and milk. Again, as you can hear, it's a very complicated situation. It's not recommended to get into it, but that was the question as it was posed, and that was the answer that was provided. Okay. What? That's true. Yeah, so we have discussed that in the past. We don't have time to get into it now. The question comes up in the Chuvot as well, in terms of owning or in terms of a waiter in a non-kosher restaurant with meat and milk. What is considered benefit? One's not allowed to get benefit from meat and milk. How exactly do we define what is or isn't considered benefit? But that we'll have to leave for another time. Rabbi Kenigsberg ben Akasha Omer,